The objective today is to describe characteristics of good internet hygiene. So this whole concept of hygiene is just like good behavior, good things, or upkeep that you should have. That way your experience on a computer goes well. Just like hygiene is so people who experience your aroma goes well. Nobody likes to hang out with somebody with poor hygiene, and you won't like to hang out on the internet if this experience doesn't have good hygiene. So the first thing we'll talk about is updates. The second thing is firewalls, and then talk about how clicking can get you in trouble. And then we'll talk about firewalls again because they are just that important. So here are the 3 best ways you can guard yourself against attacks. The first thing is make sure you always update your operating system and the software you use. And that includes updating the apps on your phone. The second thing you need to do is make sure you're using a firewall. And then the third thing is just don't download things or click on things from unknown sources. Okay, so let's start with that operating system idea. We want to update our operating system. Now on Windows 10, it should happen automatically. I like the way Linux does it, so it's really easy. It usually just asks for the permission to start the update, and then you can restart at your own convenience. And then in terms of your phone's operating system, Apple and Android usually will ask your permission to download the newest update, and you should always do that. Though Apple has a history of having updates that make the phone worse, by and large, these updates are supposed to make the phone better, or at least more secure, if not faster. Though we all know that's not always the case. Safety and security is the primary reason for updating your operating systems. Now, firewalls are really important, and a lot of people are not even aware that they have a firewall on their router. Sometimes the ISP or the internet provider that you have will just have this built-in firewall that you don't even know of. But I recently heard on a podcast that a person who doesn't have a firewall may be unaware that something like their IoT devices are being used in a nefarious way. So there was this situation where a company was brought down by IoT thermostats and coffee makers. Like, can you imagine that? And if you don't know what IoT means, it stands for Internet of Things. So these are common household things that are connected to the internet for your convenience. I'm wondering how many of you out there have IoT devices in your home. And how about this? You're in a computer class. Are you aware of how many connections your router currently has at home? You can download an app on your phone called Fing, F-I-N-G, and it should show you all the devices connected to your router. And I know there's other services out there that can tell you, but you should definitely know that. So if you have to just take a guess here, go ahead and do so. We're going with this idea that you need to know what's connected to your router. If you have a lot of IoT devices, you should know how much data is coming and going between those devices because they could be used for evil. This botnet army was created out of IoT devices to bring down a company. Even if you don't care who has access to your coffee maker, what you should care about is that your coffee maker's IP address could be using to DDoS someone. And for anybody who's experienced DDoSing, or if you're a gamer, you might particularly care about this. You don't want it to happen. Another part of good hygiene is being careful what you click on, and furthermore, knowing who is on your side. And here's the answer. Think of no one being on your side in terms of the internet. So security expert Steve Gibson has a great acronym to remember this sad fact, TNO. And he says it often in his podcasts, so he's constantly saying TNO, TNO, and I'm wondering if you can guess what it stands for here. I'll give you a hint. Think about what we had just talked about right here. So by now you should know that it is to trust no one. If you have an IoT device, make sure it's on the inside of your firewall. If you have a router, chances are there's a built-in firewall there for you. But some people, especially if you hooked up your own internet instead of having the ISP come out and do it for you, some people just put these wires on the wrong side of the router or on the wrong side of the firewall. And this is especially true if you have a router that's separate from your modem at home. So if you didn't write this down already, make sure you're writing it down. I just think it's a really good acronym to walk around with for the rest of your life. So this guy, Steve Gibson, has a great free tool for you to use called Shields Up. Now there's another website that does this. If you go to whatismyipaddress.com and then cut and paste the resulting address into the text box here at census.io, you can select IPv4 hosts, and from the drop-down menu, hit search. Let's go ahead and almost go do that. So here you are. You just type in your IP address or copy and paste it right here and search. And so here's what the website says. It says, Census is a platform that helps information security practitioners discover, monitor, and analyze devices that are accessible from the internet. And this right here, monitor, I think is very underappreciated. There is almost no foolproof security. The only thing we really seem to be able to do nowadays is monitor. So monitoring your own network at home, monitoring your own bank accounts would be a really good plan for you going forward. I heard somebody say you should check your bank account more often than you check your Twitter. That might be a little overdoing it, but I like the idea that monitoring is a big part of living in a secure way. So this is Census, and I don't use Census. I use Shields Up. But from your own computer, feel free to do this, especially if you're watching from home versus our school's network. I think what this exercise would do is give you information about which network doorways or ports may be open or exposed on your network, and can help you figure out if a device is weakening your security. One of my favorite websites, Krebs on Security, has this expert named Krebs who says a quick internet search on exposed port numbers can often yield useful results indicating which of your devices may have poked a hole. So a lot of your ports should be closed. And another way to think of a port is this concept called a network doorway. That's what a port is. It's like a doorway into your network. So I find it ironic that Steve Gibson provides us with a tool called Shields Up right after telling us to trust no one, because this is what his website is doing. It's requesting your trust. He says on the site, if you're using a personal firewall product which logs contacts by other systems, you should expect to see entries from this site's probing IP addresses. Then he gives the range. Since we own this IP range, these packets will be from us and will not be any form of malicious intrusion, attempt, or attack on your computer. You can use the report of their arrival as handy confirmation that your intrusion logging systems are operating correctly, but please do not be concerned with their appearance in your firewall logs. So Shields Up will tell you if you have certain ports exposed to the internet. Here I give you an example of my results. I use this internet exposure test. So it says internet exposure test. This internet probe sends up to 10 UPnP simple service discovery protocols, SSDP, search UDP packets, one every half second, to our visitor's current IPv4 address. And I just put a bunch of random numbers here instead of my own IPv4 address. And he's doing this, sending these packets in an attempt to solicit a response from any publicly exposed and listening UPnP SSDP service. So the UPnP protocols were never designed to be exposed to the public internet, and any internet-facing equipment which does so should be considered defective, insecure, and unusable. Any such equipment should be disconnected immediately. So then it said your equipment at and my IP address is now being queried. And then for me, I got good news. It said the equipment at this target IP address, here is where my number was, but I deleted it for the sake of this lesson, did not respond to our UPnP probes. So that was good. Now it's good to be mindful that 100% security is impossible, and Steve Gibson here says that the only way to be 100% certain is if you went to your own beach and created the microchips yourself out of the silicon. You know, silicon is made of sand there, so if you gathered the sand and made your own chips, that might be the only way to ensure your own safety. But Steve also has a reputation for being a bit of a tinfoil hat guy. But, I mean, he's a security guy. He spends all day researching and learning about horrible things happening, so I would take his advice. Here's an example of failing his Shields Up test. It says, as detailed in the port report below, that rhymes, port report, try to say that 10 times fast. One or more of your system's ports actively responded to our deliberate attempts to establish a connection. It is generally possible to increase your system's security by hiding it from the probes of potentially hostile attackers or hackers. Please see the details presented by the specific port links below, as well as the various resources on this site and in our extremely helpful and active user community. It is a good community, by the way. I like to browse it. But I'm a lurker. I'm not posting anything. Now, this example of a Shields Up report had an unsolicited packets situation that passed. So it said no internet packets of any sort were received from your system as a side effect of our attempts. Some questionable personal security systems expose their users by attempting to counter-probe the prober, thus revealing themselves. So this person, whoever the example is made out of, at least they don't have this counter-probe situation going on. And then here's a ping echo test that the person had passed as well. And it just says, your system ignored and refused to reply to repeated pings from our server. So the point of Shields Up here is to test for port vulnerabilities. Remember, network doorways. And he does this as a free service, a free utility to alert users of any ports that have been opened through their firewalls or through their NAT routers. And it's funny they use the word NAT here, because I don't know of a router that isn't a NAT router. NAT stands for Network Address Translation. Anyways, the utility can scan the most common file sharing ports as well as all service ports, so that's 1 through 1000. Remember, there's a total of 65,000 some ports out there. And of that huge number, some of them are user-defined ports, so that's sort of how the internet works. You go to a server at a specific port, like port 80, and that's where you're going to get your internet traffic from. Now, when they send the information to you, it's assigned whatever random port your computer assigns it. It doesn't necessarily have to be your port 80. But on the server side, it's at least starting off on port 80. So speaking of connecting to servers, let's discuss who is on your side. If TNO is a good thing to remember, is there anybody on your side? Well, I read about a situation by a company called BitCanal. It's a Portuguese web hosting firm that was accused of helping spammers hijack large swaths of dormant internet address space over the years. Basically what happened to these guys is they were kicked off the internet this week. Well, at the week that I found this news and copied and pasted the first paragraph here. And why were they kicked off? Well, a half dozen of the company's bandwidth providers, this is another name for internet service providers like Comcast, CenturyLink, Time Warner. So a half dozen of the company's bandwidth providers chose to sever ties with them. So what is a web hosting company? This is a company that's responsible for allowing web designers or web developers to get a domain name and host their website on the company's servers. So it's a Portuguese-based company, and they have these servers that are helping out the spammers, which the internet or bandwidth providers don't want them to do. So what a great picture right here of here's BitCanal in the center, and no one wants to mess with them because of this reputation they had gained for themselves. Because remember, at the end of the day, a web hosting company is just trying to charge people for the use of their hardware. So they're making money. They're motivated by making a profit, and if spammers are the ones paying them, clearly in this business model, that was a foolish decision to cooperate with such spammers. So you can't trust the people who own the servers. You can't trust the people who are using the servers. And in my case, you can't trust your own children in the house, because even though they're not trying to, they'll ultimately go to some website and click something that they're not supposed to. So with that said, here's another good practice of hygiene. Make sure you change the default credentials. Whenever you purchase something, if it's possible to change it, change it. That means you have a unique username and a unique password for every device, and so the people on the outside can't log in. And here's a great example of someone from the outside. I've heard stories of a person buying a security camera for their home so they can monitor the inside and outside of their home, and then the person returned the camera, kept the login credentials, the username and password for that particular camera, and then when another person bought the camera, hooked up their own home with it, so, again, inside and outside can be monitored, the original owner of the camera can now log in and see that person's life from afar. So the moment you get something new, make sure you change the password on it, at the very least, if not the username as well. Another thing you should do is just check the defaults and make sure features you may not want or need, like the UPnP example that we had discussed earlier. You've all probably heard of plug and play, so you can have a new device, you just plug it in and it works right away. Universal plug and play can easily poke holes in your firewall without you knowing it. So make sure that's disabled. You could disable it by logging into your router right there and usually just clicking a checkbox like turn UPnP on. Well, I mean, in your case, you want to turn it off, so make sure it's not checked. If you don't know much about working with your router, there's a lot of websites that can help, such as this one, the windowsclub.com. So here I am on the website, and one of the things I like right away is it says, unlike the software firewall, the router firewall attempts and blocks incoming query requests at server level, thereby keeping your entire network safe. So it's one thing to keep your network safe, it's another thing to keep each individual computer or device safe on said network. But they walk you through exactly what to do. What I really like is they're using the command line to do that as well here. Look at that. At the very bottom of the article, it suggests running a Shields Up test. There are other services out there that you can use to help monitor your network once you have it up and running. Now this one, Glasswire, costs money, but it looks beautiful. I'll show it to you here in a second. But first it reads, Glasswire is a useful tool that offers a full-featured firewall as well as the ability to tell which of your applications and devices are using the most bandwidth on your network. So that can be shocking to a lot of people. So here's Glasswire, and look, it looks great, right? You got your graph, firewall, usage, network alerts, cool little icons to show what things, devices, or software using the most bandwidth. Just a pretty nifty tool for you to use right there. Now, the guy I learned about this from said, Glasswire recently came in handy to help me determine which application was using gigabytes worth of bandwidth each day. It turned out to be a version of Amazon's Music's software client that had a glitchy updater. So if you're like me on Comcast, they cap you at a terabyte a month, and I've gone over it several times. I mean, I have a large family, maybe that's why. But to help you manage your data, Glasswire seems like a great product to do that. They didn't pay me to say that, so don't feel obligated to check that out at all. I just really like the graphics on it. So you're monitoring your network. When you see in the news that big events like this Mirai botnet occur, places like the Justice Department will release a guide to help your average citizen. So here's what that looks like. Came out July 2017, so it said their cybersecurity unit. In recent years, the dramatic growth of internet-connected devices has transformed how people, households, and businesses interact with each other in the physical world. So it gives an introduction to the concept of the Internet of Things. And then it has a nice list here of what you should do before purchasing an IoT thing. You should do your research. You should secure your IoT device immediately after purchase. Remember, I recommended changing the username and password. Make sure those passwords are strong that you're using on your stuff at home. Make sure to update, just like I said in the beginning of the lesson, but in this case you're not updating the operating system, you're updating what's called the firmware. If you can set it to automatic or automated updates, that would be best. Also, when you own an IoT device, if you're not really using the internet part of the device, don't connect it at all. Or don't connect it when you're not using it for long periods of time. Then they suggest you, just like we talked about earlier, protect your network in its entirety. And this is a really good one that I should probably institute at my own house. My daughter has so many friends that come over and want to connect their phone that I think that would not be worth the pain that I'd have to go through. There's some more advice as you scroll down. It's just nice that periodically you should inform yourself or be informed of what the latest attacks are. I started the lesson by saying an IoT device botnet had taken down a company. The name of that company is DIN. All because the people who own these devices don't have good internet hygiene. What happened was on October 21st, 2016, thousands of Mirai-infected IoT devices were directed to unleash a torrent of traffic that overwhelmed DIN's systems. So what's DIN famous for? Providing DNS servers for big companies such as PayPal, Twitter, Netflix, CNN, etc. So a torrent of traffic created a DDoS attack on these companies. They weren't able to do the basic DNS service that they offer. So as a quick refresher, the way DNS works is here I am at home. I want to go to maybe howstuffworks.com. So I ask the first server near me, like, how do I get there? What's the IP address to this website I want to go to? DDoS attack would stop this server from telling me the address of the server I'm trying to get to. So thus these are DNS servers and these are just web hosting servers. And how was it able to sever this connection right here? Well, technically it didn't like sever it. Technically all kinds of IoT devices from all over the place. So I went back and got all kinds of evil coffee pots here to show you. So all these IoT devices are talking to this server. So this little guy got right in my way. I couldn't get, I moved him over a little. I couldn't even get my request through because all these guys are in my way. So you need to protect your own network, protect your own home, if not for yourself, for other people, so that something like this doesn't happen again. And to end the lesson, let me just say that the bad guys are getting better all the time. Not better as in like becoming better people. They're getting better at being bad. So I think having good hygiene also means you're ready for when the attack eventually happens, as I think it does for a lot of people. Like, I'm hit with scams all the time. You would figure they wouldn't even try with me, but they just blanket hit people with these scams. And listen to this scenario. There's this thing called a dire wolf attack where after going through all these steps, the worst part to me seems to be the DDoS at the end. So it says immediately after the theft, a high volume of DDoS against the victim starts in order to distract or hinder the investigation. So if it wasn't bad enough that they have stolen your money, then they start pounding you so that you can't even go through the investigation process. That right there is true evil. So here's your DOL. Here's a nightmare scenario for you to experience. This is known as the Nigerian prince scam, and there's several versions of this scam. You're sitting at home and you get this email in your inbox. I'll let you go ahead and read all of this and then tell me what you think you should do.